Okay, welcome everybody to our Tuesday Lunch and Learn. And again, as we say every week, we hope this will be a time that the community of Emmett students can gather together and we can learn together and spend 30 minutes over lunch and looking at topics which we feel are beneficial to our growth and give us insight into really how to achieve the greatness that Hashem wants us to achieve. This week's class, I'd like to talk about Parshas Korach, and just a quick review, the story of Korach in terms of the individual. Who was Korach? Korach, as we know, was a first cousin to Moshe, their fathers being brothers, and if we were to rank importance in the Jewish nation, perhaps we'd say Moshe, then Aaron, and then Korach. So we're talking about an extraordinary individual, and we're talking about somebody who had potential for enormous greatness, and yet a certain jealousy aroused in him by the fact that Aaron had been chosen for the Kohen Gadol, and Korach, feeling that he should have been in fact chosen, the fact he was a first cousin to Moshe, he accused Moshe of a certain type of nepotism, choosing his own family, and what he did with that is he fomented a rebellion, and the rebellion, he brought with him 250 of the leaders of the Jewish people, and basically a rebellion against Moshe and Aaron, and this may be the first rebellion, so to speak, in the Jewish nation. And of course, the end of the story is that Hashem really very clearly delineates that Moshe was chosen by Hashem, and what he says is the word of Hashem, and in a test that emerges, we know that Korach, in fact, dies a very unnatural, supernatural death, whereby he's swallowed up by the earth. So what I'd like to deal with today is to try to understand what was his argument and really the core of what the problem was. What was the seed by which he made his fatal error? You know, we have a principle in general in Torah psychology, which is really all psychology, and Torah psychology because God designed the system, and so thereby the Torah obviously gives us insight into who and what we are, especially in terms of our psychological thinking, that we understand that whenever there's an ideology which is a rebellious ideology, oftentimes it's not the ideology which is driving it, it's clearly something else. And you know, we say that, perhaps we have an expression, you know, when people say it's not about the money, it's about the principle. So we know it's about the money. It doesn't matter if it's $100, $1,000, 50 cents, somehow that desire for money can thwart our thinking and cause us to have ideas which might not be true. But of course, nobody wants to say it's about the money because that sounds crass, it sounds low, it sounds self-serving. So one will, in fact, invent ideology to justify what they're doing. And of course, that's really the truth with Korach. And let's take a look a little bit at the story and see if we can understand, first of all, what was he saying, and then see if we could trace back a little bit to understand what the core or what the source was for the mistake, the tragic error that caused the fallacy in his thinking. So first of all, just look at the psukim. The verses begin like this: Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kas ben Levi v'dasan v'aviram, and Korah took with him Yitzhar ben Kas, the son of Levi, v'dasan v'aviram, two known troublemakers, b'nei Aliyah v'on ben Peles, On ben Peles, the person we're going to speak about soon, b'nei Ruvain, all from the tribe of Ruvain. V'yikumu lifnei Moshe v'anashim b'nei Yisrael, chamishim Messiah Nesiah Eida Kriyei Modi Anshi Hashem. These are people who are described with tremendous praise. Who are they? First of the 250 Nesiah Eida, princes of the Jewish nation, extraordinary human beings. Kuri'ei Moed, people who actually could intercalculate the months. Anshi Hashem, men of great stature. V'kalu on Moshe al Aaron, they gathered on Moshe and Aaron, v'yomer aleim, they said to them, Rab lechem. He said, Rab lechem. In other words, you've taken too much for yourself, Moshe and Aaron. He says, Kola edu kulam kadoshim. The entire Jewish nation, kulam kadoshim. They're all holy, we're all holy. Ubesocham Hashem, and Hashem dwells inside us all. Madua hisnaso kal Hashem. Why have you therefore risen above, taking yourself above the Kahal Hashem, so to speak? So what was the thrust of their argument? The thrust of the argument was, Kulam Kedoshim. We're all holy. The entire Jewish nation stood at Har Sinai. The entire Jewish nation was witness to the most magnificent revelation of the Almighty ever. And why therefore, and Hashem we know dwells amongst us all, Madur Hisnasu al Kal Hashem, why have you brought yourselves above the Jewish nation, so to speak? Why have you Moshe are the Melech, as it were, Aaron is the Kohen Gadol. Why are you seeking to rise above the Jewish nation? It doesn't seem right if we're all holy. Kulam Kedoshim. Now, first of all, a famous statement from Rabbi Tzadok Kohen, and he mentions that for a truth that we have, a verity, is that in any good argument, in any machlokas, there's always going to be an element of truth. If there isn't an element of truth, there really isn't room to have an argument. What's the truth? There is some truth in what Korach is saying. He is saying, Kulam Kedoshim, we are all holy. That's a very true statement. Every member of the Jewish nation is of enormous Kedusha, enormous holiness. And in a sense, there should be a degree of equality, as it were. Why, therefore, are some chosen to be the king, as Moshe Rabbeinu is the Melech, if you say that, and Aaron is going to be the Kohen, and his children will be the Segna Kahuna? Why do we have differentiation if we're really all holy? So the truth of that statement is, again, number one, that we all have holiness. It's also a truth, but the truth is really a truth that lives in the next world. In the next world, there will be full equality. What does that mean, full equality? It means based on what God gave someone in terms of his skill set, in terms of his talents, in terms of his intellect, in terms of his life settings, Hashem will reward completely based on what you achieved, given what I gave you. So it really means like this, for example, take an analogy. If someone gave somebody a oil rig and told them to dig in the Gulf of Saudi Arabia for oil, they'd be expected to find a lot of oil there. They'd be expected to fill up barrels upon barrels, if not tens of thousands of barrels. Why? Because you put the most fertile area where oil is of abundance, and they have the tools, the equipment to do it. There's an expectation of achievement. Whereas supposing a person was given a shovel and told to go on to Broadway in Manhattan, for example, and dig for oil. And suppose the person comes up with a thimble full of oil. That's an enormous achievement. In this world, it will have little value because we're going to look in the free market. What can you sell oil for? That thimble is going to be almost worthless, whereas the tens of thousands of barrels of oil are going to be very economically lucrative. But in the next world, God wouldn't look at it like that. In the next world, Hashem would say, wait a minute, based on what I gave you, what did you achieve? If I invested in an oil rig in you, if I invested in enormous IQ, if I invested in you an enormous a community that supports you, I gave you the ability to have an education, a Torah education, whatever it might be, a home which was so supporting and loving and nurturing, and you didn't utilize your skills, you fell short. You might have achieved a certain degree of greatness, but you could have been so much greater. So Hashem might say, listen, I invested in an oil rig in you, and that's all you produced. Whereas a person who maybe is challenged in this world, whether it be intellectually challenged, whether it be emotionally challenged, whether it be psychologically challenged, whether it be challenges of one's life circumstances, one's family, home, environment, things that occurred in that person's life that created an enormous challenge. And yet the person achieved, even if the person achieved a thimble full of achievement, Hashem might say that's of enormous value to me. And in fact, it might even be greater than the person to whom I gave so much, invested so much in, and only produced a quarter of what that person was expected to produce. That's the equality of the next world. There's going to be absolute reward based on everything related to who and what we are in our life situation, our life circumstances. That's not this world, though. This world is a world of differentiation. It's a world where we have to recognize there are going to be experts. There are people who know more than we do. It's a world where we're going to have to work on the the midah, the trait of humility, to understand that not everything, I can't achieve everything, and I'm dependent on other people. It's a world where we have to work on acceptance that there's a divine plan that which we don't understand, even when it's difficult for us. I would like the position. Why does he get it? But to understand that, yeah, my life's work will have to be that. That's not my role. This is a world where there will be differentiation and expertise, and that's part of the divine plan of this world. And maybe it's an important part of that divine plan, the inequality, because inequality comes the need to work on the trait of humility and acceptance, and maybe appreciation that what I can offer the world is something totally unique that doesn't need that position. So for whatever reason, Hashem creates the inequality in this world. It's a function of this world, and therefore there has to be goodness in it, and it's our job to find it. So Korach's statement that we're all kulam kadoshim, and we're all holy, is a true statement, but it doesn't apply to this world. It's interesting, by the way, that Korach does something somewhat unusual. It says that the Parsha just before the Parsha of Korach is the Parsha that deals with the chapter of Citrus. For Yomer Hashem Moshe Lemor, the end of Parsha Shalach, juxtaposed to this week's Parsha. And of course we know juxtaposition in the Torah is very crucial. One way Hashem conveys meaning is by the way he orders his chumash, so to speak, where he orders his mind, which is, Torah is just an expression of God's mind. So juxtaposition, why one parsha follows another parsha, is of indeed of importance. And the parsha just before Korach is the Parsha of Citrus, where, just to go back a paragraph in the Torah, it says, "V'yomer Hashem al Moshe lemor," and Hashem says to Moshe, "Deber b'nei Yisrael ve'amart alehem," speak to the b'nei Yisrael and say to them, "Asulim tzitzis al kanfei v'nedor asam," place tzitzit on their four-cornered garments for all generations. V'nasnu at tzitzit a kanaf pesil techeles, and place on the tzitzit a knaf. One of the threads has to be a thread which is techeles, this beautiful blue. V'haylechem tzitzis, and you should be for you tzitzis or yisemoso. You should look at them as zachartim as kol mitzvos Hashem, and remember all the mitzvos Hashem, asisimosam, and perform them below sasurach v'levavchem v'achreinechem, and not to go after your heart and your eyes, asher atem zonim acharehem, which could lead you astray. And that's the paragraph that we recite as the third paragraph of Kriyat Shema, and we have a mitzvah to read it twice a day. The mitzvah of tzitzit for men, when one wears a four-cornered garment, is in fact such that we know that wherever we have four-cornered garments, we have to take 4 strands and fold them over, so we have 8. 7 of them are going to be white, and 1 is going to be blue. It's a special type of blue. It's a blue from a special type of clam that one can create this techeles, this extraordinarily beautiful blue. It's a question today if we in fact know and can identify the source of that dye that's needed to be made. There are those who say today that we have identified it, and it is a clam that lives in the Mediterranean Sea, and that's why we'll see today that there are people who are wearing techeles. One strand of the tzitzis will be blue, and it's not necessarily universally recognized as this is the halacha that should be followed, but there are indeed those who are doing that, and under the feeling that we have found that clam. But it is a question in halacha. There are those who aren't sure, and some of the gedolim have not yet come out to say that we should be doing it, and that's why many of us do not do it yet, although others do it. But it's interesting, what did Korach do? The Parsha of Citrus had just been taught, preceding apparently this rebellion. So it says in the Medrash, and Rashi brings it right in the pasuk. It said, "Ma also." The Medrash relates something from the Medrash Tanchuma, and it relates as follows. It says, "Ma also." It said, "What did Korach do?" Amad v'konos mesayim v'chamishim roshi Sanhedrot. He got up before Moshe and Aaron, and he presented to them the 250 men of the Sanhedrin, men who are extraordinary Talmid Chachamim, men capable of being on the Sanhedrin, capable of psak and din and judgment. It says, Ruvan Mishevet Ruven Shchenov. Most of them that we know came from the tribe of of Ruvain. And what happened over here? It says as follows, that it says that he took them all and he dressed them all up in a garment of tuchelis, a garment of blue. That's interesting. What did he do? Hilbishin taliso shekulam tuchelis. He placed a fully blue tuchelis talis on them, a garment. Bo v'amdu lifnei Moshe, and he brought them in front of Moshe. Amrulo, and they said to Moshe, "Talis shechulu shetuchelis chayaves b'tzitzis sopatura." Is a talis which is entirely blue obligated in that one strand of blue tzitzis, or is it exempt? Amr lim chayaves. Moshe says you're obligated. You still have to put it on. He began to laugh. Is it possible that when a talis or a garment is all white, we know that one chut, one thread of blue, turns it into the kosher tzitzis, a kosher talis? This is what this one, which is entirely blue. Lo tifto as atzma. It still needs a blue thread. Again, what was his argument? He said he dressed them all up in blue. And he said if one blue thread could exempt a garment which is all white and has 7 white strands, if the garment is entirely blue, does it still need that one little strand of blue? What was he saying in that? What was he doing? What was that all about? So, many explanations. We see that when Moshe said, yeah, you are obligated that one strand, he began to laugh. So, Chaim Shmulevitz, the Mir, says, sometimes you can take away a lot of fear of God by making a joke at the wrong time. Doing something which is called leitzonot, a joke which mocks, like they were mocking it. And when you mock something, it cheapens it. And now all of a sudden things don't seem so important anymore. You know, the power of a joke is twofold. A joke can build, it can cause a person to alleviate this pressure or depression, and it can be so energizing. Or a negative joke can take away a person, can make fun of something and mock it. And it's very difficult to restore the gravity and seriousness. There's one thing we learned from that. But I'd like to point something I think a little bit different. Let's think a little about the colors for a moment and talk about colors. We know that at tzitzis in general, for tzitzis, the strands, the garment, anytime we have a 4-cornered garment, we know that it requires tzitzit. So, first of all, let's retrace and just go back for a moment. Why something 4-cornered? So it's interesting, if we think about it, the idea of corners are something very unique. What's the idea of a corner? The idea of a corner is that something comes to an end. There's a boundary to it. There's a limitation to it. What's the idea of tzitzit? Tzitzit is the vision where you think something has come to an end. Where you think, there's nothing else, I just see a corner. No, tzitzit says you got to look beyond that. Something will extend from that. There's more than what you can see. And of course, that's a major life lesson, looking at the world. How do we look at the world? You look at the world and you see boundaries and borders. Understand, no, you got to look beyond that. There's more than the eye can perceive. There's something which extends beyond it. That's one of the visions of why we put tzitzis. We want to understand that this world has no limitation on it. This world might appear to be finite, but it's not. There's an infinity to it. There's the essence of God in it, which makes it infinite. You know, it's interesting that it's one of the reasons why we love to look at oceans. You know, people speak about it, and my partner, Rabbi Rutenberg, speaks about this often, this idea that when one looks out at an ocean, one gets very, very moved. Why are we so moved? Because the ocean triggers something inside of us to say there's infinity. There's something so beyond. There's endlessness, and the soul gets drawn to that because the soul knows there's infinity. The soul knows there's Ein Sof. There's nothing. There's no end. We live in a world we think, well, there's finitude, something finite and end. There's a corner. No, it goes beyond that. That's the excitement and the draw to the ocean. Look at it. The soul gets such pleasure in that awareness of, I'm looking at a friend. I'm looking at something which is giving me the impression of infinity. I can't see beyond the right. I'm looking so far out, it goes on and on and on. That's why people pay more, as they say, for the oceanfront view. Maybe they don't know why they're paying for it. They're paying for it because the soul's attracted to infinity. So that's one of the visions of a corner. They were supposed to put fringes on it, extension on it. There's another vision of it, and perhaps it's the idea that our purpose in life is that things have to sprout out from us. I mean, our job is that we have to be producing, we have to be giving out to the world. Citrus says, don't keep it all to yourself, give it out, go beyond yourself. Something extend outward. But why the colors, the blues and the white? So we're commanded to put 7 strands of white. What's the vision of white? White in Hebrew is the color Lavan. So Lavan, actually, if we break up the word Lavan, white, it spells the word Lev, which means the heart. And we have the letter Nun at the end. Nun Sofit is the longest letter that just keeps extending and extending, goes below the line. There's something about white which says, take your heart and bring your heart as deep out as it can go. Now, if we think about it for a moment, when we look at white light really isn't white at all. If we were to refract white through a prism, what would we find? We'd see a rainbow. We'd see red, orange, yellow, blue, green, indigo, and violet. Roy B. Jiv, as we remember from our science classes. Red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, green, and violet. It's all contained in the white. So what does white say? White always speaks a language of there's something beyond and behind that you know is there, but you just can't see it. There's something beneath the surface which is hidden, but you know it's there. In Hebrew, there's a word for that. It's called emunah, trust. Trusting that which we can't see. Knowing that Hashem is behind the scenes, knowing that Hashem is directing our lives, knowing that Hashem is guiding us, but we can't perceive it, we can't see it always. And we have to let our heart take us to places where sometimes the mind doesn't always see, doesn't always understand. That's the idea of emunah. Where does that live, trust? Well, it really lives in a part of ourselves which isn't always intellectual. Because intellectually we might get stuck. I can't see. I don't know. I just see white light. I don't know why this is happening to me right now. I don't understand. I don't know. I don't get God's plan in this particular situation. But white says, no, just as there are 7 colors that contain the white, and I'm confident that beneath the white, if I were to refract it differently, I would see it. Emunah speaks the language of my heart will tell me that I know that Hashem is here and there's a plan and it's a good plan, even though I don't always understand what it is. That's white for us. And that's why the word for white in Hebrew is Lavan. Lev means heart, because where does emunah live? Not always in the intellect, it lives in the heart. That other side of us which can sense and feel and trust. And the letter Nun, Sofit, extends it, takes it down as deep as it can go. That's what Lavan says. Lavan says, take your heart and bring it as deep out as you can go and trust. Now it's interesting. 7 strands of the 8 have to be white, which really is an important idea and a very beautiful spiritual concept. 7 strands have to be emunah. Our foundation in life must be built on emunah. It must be built on trusting Hashem. Because really our relationship with Hashem is going to be based on trying to love exactly where we don't understand. And perhaps we could say, by the way, if when we love in general, real love, whether it be for Hashem or whether it be for a spouse, is really loving exactly that which we don't understand about the other. Because if we're to love what we understand, one might argue that's self-love. I'm loving what makes sense to me. But when you love the other based on who the other is, and purely who the other is, I'm really loving you for who you are. Oftentimes that love will live exactly where we don't understand the other. Now how do we do that? Well, we extrapolate. We see so much goodness, we see so much kindness, we see so much understanding, and then we don't understand something. Okay, I'm willing to love you for that because I have such a good track record with me. But really, that might be where the love really lies, because I'm loving you where I don't understand you, where my mind can't perceive it, where I don't always get it. And that's real love. And that's a love based on trusting, not necessarily based on the intellect. We use the intellect perhaps to get there, looking at the track record. I always think to myself like this, if my father were to call me and wake me up in the middle of the night and say to me, Mordechai, it's 3 a.m, I need lemon meringue pie. Well, I could have two responses. One response might be, Dad, I don't know, I didn't know you like lemon meringue pie. And it's 3 a.m, Can it wait? But I might reevaluate and say, wait a minute. This is a person who for the last many decades has only shown his love, support, devotion to me, an enormous track record of care and interest in who I am, is someone I could rely on fully and I trust fully. If he's asking it of me, maybe my job isn't to question, but to say, that's what you need, I'm willing to do it. I trust it must be a reason that I don't understand because of your track record with me. Hashem calls upon us for the same devotion. Trust me and love me where you don't always understand me, because that's really where love is going to live. 7 strands have to be white. 7 strands of Emunah. There has to be a foundation of the recognition that I'm not always going to get it, and that is a good thing, because that's necessary for the love. However, once you have those 7 strands, now take that blue. Take that blue and weave it around and wrap it right around it. What does blue represent? It's interesting. Again, the Hebrew language, I think, is so instructive in these areas. And the word for blue in Hebrew is kachol, which is chaf, chet, lamed. And again, if you break up those 3 letters, we know that every letter has a meaning. It has both. You could join letters to create words, and every letter has its own meaning. You could divide that into 2, and you have chaf, chet, which means koach, and lamed means study. What's blue? The koach of lamed, the koach of intellectual investigation, the power of using the mind to search and to understand. That's what blue represents. And that's why it says you're supposed to look at that blue on your tzitzis, the chelis, when we would have it, or if we do have it. Look at the blue. The blue is supposed to enable one to use the mind to think, wow, it reminds me of the ocean. And then one's supposed to use the mind again to say, well, the ocean, that's a reflection of the sky, and I need to look up at the blue of the sky. And then one looks up at the blue of the sky, one goes further and says, wow, what's beyond that? There's the blue, which is the base of the Kisei HaKavod, of the throne of Hashem. In other words, that beautiful measure speaks to the idea. Blue says, look at the ocean, think about it. Think about the sky, contemplate the throne of Hashem. Blue says, think. It's the koach of lamed. In fact, just in terms of the way light works, the reason why the ocean appears blue and the sky appears blue, obviously when we get close to the water, we're so disappointed to realize that it's not blue. And we go on an airplane, we're very disappointed to realize, wow, it's not blue up here at all, But apparently when we look at the sky from a distance, or we look at the ocean from a distance, the way light converges When you see things from the distance, light will converge in a way in which the color that we detect is blue. In fact, that's as far as the eye can see. When the eye looks out, the farthest color that we can see when light gathers and converges will be blue. We know there's more beyond that, right? Because Roy B. Jiv, Roy G. Viv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The eye can't perceive that. There is indigo and violet behind it. But when we look towards the distance, we use the eye and the mind to look out as far as we can go, which is a metaphor for the idea of using our intellectual capacity to see and to understand. As far as we'll be able to see light converge, will be blue. So blue is always a metaphor for us in Torah thought, the idea of koach lamed, using the mind to think. So what does Citrus represent? These beautiful blues and whites. White is the 7 foundation of trust. Once you understand that there's so much we don't understand, that you can go as deep as you want intellectually. Utilize your mind and understand and probe and ask, and there's nothing wrong with asking and trying to gain intellectual knowledge and to have questions and to search. That's all part of what living a spiritual life is. God gave us a mind. He wants us to utilize it and to understand this world. And those who've enjoyed the study of Talmud and understand that it's nothing but intense intellectual inquiry, as is all Jewish study. But it has to be based on that foundation of Emunah. There are going to be areas where I'm not always going to understand. Get your 7 foundations of white, Levan, Lev to the Nun, the heart as deep as it can go, that's Emunah. And then once you have that clear, go as deep as you want with that blue, as tight as you want. Take that one strand of blue and go for it. So it's interesting that Korach comes before Moshe, and he comes before Moshe with all of his followers, and they're all dressed in blue. And he turns to Moshe, he says to Moshe, if one blue thread can exempt an entire white garment and white strands, certainly if the whole thing is blue, it doesn't need a blue strand anymore. So what was he saying? I saw a very beautiful explanation, and I saw this in a work of Rabbi Berkowitz, that really he's coming to Moshe with a more of a sophisticated challenge than we think. Moshe, if blue represents intellect and white represents trust, emunah, if you understand something, if you have the blue, if you get it intellectually, if there's an intellectual reason for something, do you still have to back it up by trusting something which doesn't necessarily make sense? In other words, if you can be all blue, if you can gather and perceive and have a logic which dictates your thinking, maybe that logic should overcome or should override trust. I don't need to trust when I could get my intellect and use my mind to understand. What do we need trust for? Let's all be blue. If you're all blue, that should really be the goal. And that was really trying to create the position behind his attack. Moshe, you just came to us with a mitzvah of tzitzis, which says you have to trust. And once you trust, then you have to use intellect. But supposing you understand something even deeper, your mind can understand it. Do you still have to have that foundation of trust? Use your mind. Didn't God create us with a mind? Doesn't God want us to utilize the mind to perceive and understand? And in essence, that was really he was utilizing to justify his attack. We're all Kedoshim, Kulam Kedoshim. We all stood at Har Sinai. We're all holy. If we're all holy, why should there be differentiation? One person being the Nasi, you Moshe, one being the Kohen Gadol, you Aaron. Why should there be such a thing? We're all equal. We get that intellectually. Let's be all blue in our thinking. Why do we have to trust a system? Doesn't make sense. If we could all be blue, if the intellect can take us to where we need to go. And to that Moshe Rabbeinu says back, no, it doesn't work that way. You still need the system. You still need one blue thread upon 7 white. The foundation has to be emunah. The foundation has to be trust. in essence, Korach is using this color scheme sort of against Moshe Rabbeinu. The color scheme in which God gave to teach us that, 7 foundations of white. Amunah has to be there, and then go intellectually. Korach is saying, no, if I understand intellectually, what do you need to have Amunah for something that doesn't make sense? Maybe the mind should override that which doesn't make sense. Again, what was driving that thought was really his desire that he should justify his position of, aren't we all equal? Doesn't that make sense? And if we're all equal, why should there be differentiation in division of labor, in different classes, as it were, or not classes, but perhaps job description in the Jewish nation? Again, what's driving that, of course, we know, was his jealousy, and jealousy isn't something we want to admit. We always want to justify it with a sophisticated, powerful argument. And at some level, this is a sophisticated argument, maybe a very sophisticated argument. The argument is, if we get it intellectually, why should we fall back on trusting something which doesn't make sense? Let the intellect determine. Let the intellect decide. Let's go with the blue. Moshe, you must be wrong in what you said. Or maybe you even made it up to justify your own need for control, and you want your own brother to get the job. But Moshe, that doesn't make sense. If the blue is all there, why do we have to trust that which we don't understand? And Moshe Rabbeinu comes back, of course, and says that's not the system. No. You still need that one thread of blue. It still needs the 7 strands of white. There has to be that beautiful balance of emunah together with intellect. And that's really the full expression of a human being. And the full expression of Jewish life is where we live a life of, Hashem, I trust you, I'm going to love you, and I know how good you are. You have such a good track record with me and with the world and with everyone. And I'm not going to fall off that, even if I don't understand. But once I have that clear, I'm going to try to work and utilize my mind to delve the depth of your thought and your ideas. But if I don't always understand it, I'm going to love you for where I don't understand. I'm going to, and maybe that's where real love lives, as we spoke about. So one thing we see in Korach's attack, again, he's utilizing Citrus is to justify really his desire to say we're all equal, and he's hiding behind a enormously sophisticated argument. Yet what's really driving the argument is something completely different. And that Chazal tell us is jealousy. And when there's jealousy, we know that emotion, that drive, that need can thwart the intellect to view the world in the way we want to see it, and not always the way the world really is. I'd like to share just one more idea on the idea of blue and white. And this is a beautiful concept that I saw in the name of Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rabbi, who just 25th yard site was this past Shabbos. And a beautiful insight which he says about the blue and the white is that Korach's coming with a certain vision. And the vision is, supposing we can be all blue. We can be completely covered with blue. Do we still need one blue thread? How can that be? One little blue thread can exempt a garment which is entirely blue? In other words, if the garment was all white, I understand you need that blue thread. But supposing we could be completely blue, do we still need that one blue thread? To which Moshe responds, yeah, you still need it. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe offers something which I thought was so fascinating and so insightful. Sometimes we look at the world in a way in which we want to make revolutionary changes. We want to say, how can we transform the world, transform ourselves? Let's make the world all blue. Let's make ourselves all blue. Let's go out there and have a big vision of Tikkun Olam, perhaps, and just fix it all up and change it and revolutionize it and make it better and foment rebellions. And who needs the minutia? Who needs all these small little mitzvot? Just go after the big picture. Maybe that's even a question that we get as rabbis, and maybe we're challenged with by others in our lives. Why all the details that we do? So many small things that we're interested in. Just go for the big picture, be all blue, go out and make the world a better place. Work with the poor, work with try to stop famines, help people, go for it. Just be blue. If you're being all blue like that, if you're going for this deep level vision of sort of fusing with the blue of heaven, just go for that large vision. Why do you need small things in life, like one thread of citrus that has to be blue? To which Moshe says, no, you need that one thread. Because there's an enormous lesson in that. The way real change comes about is when we do the small things in our life. We tend to think that, we could just change the world. It doesn't work that way. We change the world when we change ourselves. And the way we change ourselves is when we work on the small areas in our lives. We need that one blue thread, and we put it on our tzitzis, and we wear it under our garment, and it seems so small, but it's actually an explosion. It's a detonation. It's a brick that's building a foundation of a human being that can be godly. It's building a foundation of a person who can impact the world in such a deep and special way. That's the vision that the Torah is trying to convey to us. That you can't revolutionize, can't foment revolution, I should say. You can't change the world by going out with new isms, with new ideas. The way we change the world is through the small things in our life, the small acts of kindness, the one small thread. And we understand that these things are of enormous value, because that's the way real change occurs in the human being, in small, incremental ways. And therefore not to look at the small things in our life and think they're small at all. Small things in our life are very valuable. Every mitzvah is of enormous importance. But you can almost hear Karak's dream. Go for the blue, fuse with the blue of heaven. Just go for the revolutionary vision, change the world. I think I maybe felt that as a younger person in my life. But I think what I've come to see is, no, it doesn't work that way. You have to change yourself. You have to change yourself one step along the way, one mitzvah at a time. One small blue thread is of enormous value. And they tell a famous story of the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen, died in 1933 from Radin in Poland. So one time he was on the train and he was coming towards the town, and the whole town was so excited. The Chafetz Chaim is coming on the train, and the people were gathered at the train station to greet him, to meet him. And he had a traveling companion, one of the great Rabbanim of Europe. And he said, Rabbi Yisrael Meir, there's a whole crowd there who wants to greet you, see you. He says, I'll tell you a story. So when I was a young man, I had a vision. I had ideas. I had such beautiful concepts and ideas of holiness and Kedusha. And I felt if I would just bring these ideas to the people, I could bring the generation back to God, back to Torah and Mitzvot. And the Chafetz Chaim says, as a young man, I went out and I tried to speak in the synagogues, in the shuls, in the places where they would listen. So nobody came to hear what I had to say. So I came back to Radin, and I tried a different approach. I sat in my yeshiva. He said he sat in the Ezras Nashim where he learned, and he started working and learning, produced some of the most important Sfarim books that we have today, including the Mishnah Berurah. And he said, now, 65 years later, I'm riding on a train. There's a whole crowd that wants to hear what I have to say. So he turned to his traveling companion and he said, don't try to change the world. Change yourself, and the world will change with you. And I think that's such an important concept. Change yourself, and the world will change with you. We change ourselves one mitzvah at a time. That's the idea of the blue thread. One small thing at a time. as desirable it is to foment revolution and be all blue and fuse with the blue of God. It doesn't work that way. The small things of our life, the small interactions, the small conversations, the seemingly small interactions, the seemingly small conversations are of enormous value in changing ourselves and changing the world around us. So perhaps the take home from today's idea is that we have a rebellion, we have Korach. Obviously jealousy was driving him. Through his jealousy, he fomented a rebellion. He developed a sophisticated idea in order to justify what he did. He built it around the blues and the whites. The idea, if you understand this thing intellectually, why do you have to trust? If it makes sense that we're holy, why do we need job differentiation? But the answer is, of course, we do. He did it in the area of Citrus, which is very interesting. Citrus is the mitzvah that says, Lo sasuach v'levavchem yachreinechem. Don't go after your eyes and your heart. Don't be distracted by your internal motivation, so to speak, that can thwart your intellect, which is really what Korach was all about. And blues and whites, Moshe responds and says, doesn't work that way. Foundation has to be white. Once you have white, once you have trust, go as deep as you want intellectually, explore, understand. And of course, the beautiful concept which we said in the name of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Sometimes we want to be all blue. And we think if we're all blue, one blue thread doesn't matter. It doesn't work that way. The way we become all blue, the way we achieve greatness, is in the small areas of our life, one mitzvah at a time. I wish everybody a wonderful week, and I look forward to continuing our discussions and growing together on Tuesday next week as well.